with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Tonight on Farage, we'll be discussing the European Court of Human Rights in Strasbourg, who last night prevented that plane from going to Rwanda. I'll be joined by Tom Pursglove, the minister responsible for illegal immigration, asking him, should we leave ECHR? I'll have lawyers, academics, MPs, all talking about this subject. And it's Royal Ascot Week, so we're going to talk a bit of horse racing and the horse racing industry with former double Grand National winner Carl Llewellyn. He'll be here with me on Talking Pints. All of that comes after the news.
Nigel, thank you. And we start this hour with some breaking news that's just come to us. The Prime Minister's independent advisor on ministers' interests has resigned. That's happened within the last 4 or 5 minutes. Lord Geidt says with regret he feels it's right to quit his post. That's after the ethics aide yesterday told a Commons committee it was reasonable to suggest Boris Johnson breached the ministerial code when he was fined by police over Partygate. Let's get the latest on this now from Darren McCaffrey, who's in Westminster. What's happened here, Darren, and why?
Well, there's been lots of to and fro in, hasn't there, Polly, over Lord Geidt's position. He has hinted in the past that he may well resign in the wake of the Partygate scandal. He has, you rightly pointed out, had suggested that it was worth asking the Prime Minister whether that breach of the law was a resigning issue. Well, clearly, Lord Geidt thinks it's a resigning issue for him. He was the man who previously had investigated whether Boris Johnson had broken the ministerial code when it came to wallpaper in his flat. This is troublesome news, though, for Boris Johnson. Lord Geidt had been in the post just over a year. He's the second ethics advisor to resign under Boris Johnson's premiership. And again, it will refocus the Conservative Party's attention back on Partygate, the implication, of course, that it could have an effect on the by-elections next week. At a time in which the government seemed to have moved on the agenda, Lord Geidt's resignation brings it very much back into the spotlight again.
Free for the moment. Thanks very much indeed. Well, in other news today, the Home Secretary insists the government will continue with its plan to deport illegal migrants to Rwanda. That's despite a last-minute ruling last night by the European Court, which stopped a planned deportation flight. A spokesperson for the Prime Minister says the government is keeping all options on the table, including potentially withdrawing from the European Convention on Human Rights. Priti Patel saying the government is determined to find a way forward.
While this decision by the Strasbourg court to intervene was disappointing and surprising given the repeated and considered judgments to the contrary in our domestic courts, we remain committed to this policy. These repeated legal barriers are, Madam Deputy Speaker, very similar to those that we experience with all other removal flights, and we believe that we are fully compliant with our domestic and international obligations, and preparations for our future flights and the next flights have already begun.
Priti Patel. Yorkshire Cricket Club and a number of individuals have been charged by the England and Wales Cricket Board over allegations of racism. An independent panel of the Cricket Discipline Commission will now decide if the individuals have brought the game into disrepute. The ECB hasn't named those involved, but the charges follow an investigation into the club's handling of racism allegations made by the player Azim Rafiq. The government says it's disappointed the European Union has decided to take legal action against the UK over plans to unilaterally override the Northern Ireland Protocol. The EU says if Britain doesn't respond within 2 months to their challenge, it'll take the UK to the European Court of Justice. European Commission Vice President Maros Sefcovic says the UK's move has no legal or political justification. You're up to date on TV, online and on your radio via DAB+. You're with GB News, where now it's time for Farage.
A government elected with a massive majority to get Brexit done, to free us from European institutions and, of course, to take back control of our borders. And I remember 6 years ago next week, that vote, the turnout was much higher in the referendum than anybody predicted. And the key factor that got people to go to the polls was they wanted control of our borders. And yet, at 10:05 last night, some obscure judge, whose name we don't know, from the European Court of Human Rights in Strasbourg, finally puts the tin lid on any idea that a plane will go to Rwanda. And within 3 or 4 hours of that judgment, the first migrant boat came in to Dover at about midnight last night. There were 44 people on this boat, you can see if you're following this on television, and they weren't added to yesterday's number of 444 people who crossed the channel and were processed in through Dover Centre. And this morning, a boat dropped off 12 men on Slapton Sands Beach in Devon. They disappeared very quickly into waiting vans. So we have illegal immigration into Britain not just happening on the narrowest part of the English Channel, it's happening even more broadly than that. Now, I have been saying for some years now that for Brexit to be complete, we've got to be free of the European Convention on Human Rights. We've got to be free of that European Court of Human Rights. Interestingly, Theresa May and David Cameron were prepared to contemplate leaving ECHR. Boris Johnson didn't do the job. Should we leave ECHR? That's my question to you, the viewers and listeners tonight. Give me your answers, farage@gbnews.uk. Well, earlier on, we thought we'd get the temperature in Westminster. So Joe Casper from our team went out and asked a series of questions, starting with the Attorney General, Suella Braverman. She was asked, should we leave ECHR?
Well, it's obviously very disappointing. Prime Minister, the Home Secretary's just made a statement in the Commons setting that out. And the government's going to be considering all options on what the response should be.
Is that one of the options, leaving?
I'm not going to make policy on the hoof in the street. You'll respect that process. But the Prime Minister, the Home Secretary, everybody in government's absolutely determined to stop the illegal practice, the unlawful practice, the harmful and destructive practice of people smuggling across the channel.
How disappointed were you that that plane didn't take off? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I really appreciate your time.
Well, the ECHR was produced by Conservative lawyers to stop Germany after the war and learn the lessons from the appalling Holocaust, which killed 6 million people. And I think those Conservative lawyers from Britain did a very good job in protecting human rights after the most despicable murder of 6 million people.
I'm not commenting on that, I'm afraid.
Thank you very much.
And this obsession with these Rwanda flights, this immoral, expensive and now failing policy, is undermining the rest of the immigration system, which Priti Patel said today she wants to make sure is firm and fair. Well, she needs to be addressing the problems that are already within the system. It's not fit for purpose.
Oh, good grief, no, I would not. We helped to found it after the end of the Second World War. Churchill played an important part in creating it.
But
it would be terrible if Britain were to leave.
But it's stopping foreign policy. Thank you.
Human rights.
Well, they were the reactions we got in the street in Westminster. Not exactly overwhelming support there for leaving ECHR, but interestingly, the government minister saying all options are on the table. Well, joining me is Tom Pursglove MP, and he is, of course, the Minister for Illegal Immigration. Before we get to the heart of the matter, the breaking news in the last half an hour, Lord Geidt, the ethics advisor to the Prime Minister, has resigned his position in the wake of Partygate. It's not a good look, is it?
Well, I'm not really in a position to say too much, Nigel, in the sense I've been touring the television studios talking about the partnership with Rwanda this evening. But
it's not a good look.
Well, what I would say is that clearly Lord Geidt has reached a conclusion. He is a distinguished public servant who in several roles has contributed much to our country, and I just want to say thank you to him for the work that he has done. And I understand he hasn't given specific reasons, and of course this is a private matter for him, and if he chooses to make his views known,
just doesn't show great confidence in Boris Johnson, I would suggest, but we'll come back to this another time. Now, Tom, on the 14th of April, you announced the Rwanda policy. You came and sat in that very chair, and I put to you at the end of our conversation this question.
Strongly
Would you
about
repeal
it.
the Human Rights Act if it proves that this plan cannot operate because of that European legislation in UK law?
Well, I am very clear, Nigel, that what we are doing is entirely compliant with our international obligations, and so that shouldn't be required. The Deputy Prime Minister is looking at, of course, the human rights legislation. That's currently out to consultation, and we are determined to bring forward reform. But I would argue that the policies that we are talking about today are compliant, so I would argue that legal challenge would be baseless.
We'll see. Well, Tom, you hoped at the time that we'd be compliant, but as it turned out, at 10:05 last night, a nameless judge from the court in Strasbourg basically, as I say, put the tin lid on that flight going to Rwanda. We can't do this if we stay part of the ECHR. We can't do this if the Human Rights Act stays unamended, can we?
Well, it is disappointing, of course, that there was that injunction on that specific case that the ECHR handed down. And what is frustrating is that when I left to come and see you, we still hadn't got the specifics of that judgment. We don't actually understand all the underpinning of why they've reached the conclusions.
Doesn't that prove my point? Doesn't that prove my point? We shouldn't be subject to a European court made up of people in many cases who aren't even judges. I mean, they're almost political activists. Isn't it time to get the Brexit process completed?
Well, when you consider that in the British courts there were these applications for the injunctions, and at each stage they were not granted. We have got the more fundamental court hearing that's going to take place in July around the policy as a whole. But I think actually the ingredients of what I said when I was here 2 months ago still apply. We maintain that this policy is compliant with all of our international obligations. We go into these proceedings confident of those grounds, and we will argue that case passionately.
Tom Pursglove, you can maintain whatever you like, but some obscure judge in Strasbourg can rule against you. Isn't it time? I mean, isn't it time to recognise that you will not be able to put in place this policy of sending people to Rwanda, which is in effect a government flagship policy, and if you wait another couple of months for this, that's another 20,000 that'll come, or perhaps even more, because as you can see with the weather, the pace, the numbers that are crossing the channel are increasing very, very quickly. Isn't it time to face up to it? That this government's got to make a massive decision. Do we leave ECHR or do we stay a part of it? What would you like to do?
We need this policy and we need it to work, and I think it's instrumental actually and really indicative that the Prime Minister has come out today and again reasserted that we will do whatever is necessary to make this work. The Attorney General, when you caught her on the street earlier on, commented that she wasn't ruling various steps out.
She said that all options are on the table.
Exactly, and we need to be sure of our footing. We need to deal in fact. I want to see this judgment around the injunction that was made. I want to understand precisely what their rationale for this is. I think it is very frustrating, and I think your viewers at home will be as irritated as I am and as irritated as you are that we have had this injunction on that specific case that then did wipe out several of the last of the few people on this.
Irritated. A huge number of voters in the so-called Red Wall. A lot of people who've switched their votes. They were Labour years and years ago. They voted Conservative. Many cases for the first time in December 2019. And they really thought that getting Brexit done, delivering on our borders, this is why they voted for you. So I put it to you. If the other options don't work, are you prepared to contemplate? Would you, in those circumstances, back leaving ECHR?
Well, you try to tempt me down a particular avenue, but we need to be sure of our position.
No,
we need
I'm
to understand precisely
asking you
what has
if
happened.
all options, and by the way, I'm certain this isn't going to work all the while we're part of the ECHR. I predicted that when you were here 2 months ago. I believe it very strongly. I could be wrong, I could be right. I'm just asking you, Tom Pursglove, very simply, if the other options don't work, are you prepared to back leaving the ECHR?
Well, I believe, as I've said previously, that our policy is compliant with our international obligations, and so in that sense, these legal challenges should be baseless. And we go into these proceedings in the British courts in July, confident of our position about this policy. But as the Prime Minister said, we will make an assessment based on the facts, and we will make judgments then about what the appropriate next steps are.
Make could be a very, very long time down the road, by which time the sheer number of people crossing the English Channel will become overwhelming. And with it, your chances of winning the next general election will have gone, won't they?
And you know what the worst thing about all this is, actually? It's the fact that every day that passes where we don't have this policy, this partnership in place with Rwanda, people risk their lives in small boats and in the backs of lorries. There's a moral imperative to act, and I feel really strongly about this. It's what keeps me awake at night in this job. As the Minister for Tackling Illegal Migration, it keeps me awake, thinking that we may wake up to another sinking in the Channel like we saw in November, like the loss of life we saw in the back of a lorry in Grays. And I think that's right as to why the Prime Minister has said that we mustn't rule out any option and that we must be sure-footed as we move forward, work out what is necessary to make this work and then get on and do it.
Tom Pursglove, thank you for joining me. I hear what you say, but I suspect if the government does reach that conclusion, it'll be a long, long time down the track, by which, as I say, many, many more people will have crossed. Now, of course, the origins of the European Convention on Human Rights, and it's something that its big supporters say very strongly, well, this was British ideas, Winston Churchill backed it. You know, it was all there post-war. It was designed to be an early warning system to stop the things that were happening in Germany in the 1930s from happening. But isn't it, given that it's over 70 years ago, isn't it now a little bit out of date? Well, I'm joined by Paul Garlick, QC, barrister specialising in extradition and human rights law, and with a distinguished career in the European Commission and many other places. And you're a big supporter of the European Court of Human Rights.
I am indeed.
I understand why it was founded. I get those arguments. But you must see, surely, that what happened at 10:05 last night was an affront to Brexit Britain, to any thoughts that we are a sovereign nation in charge of our own big decisions.
No, I don't see that at all. It's completely wrong. What happened last night was a judge, and you described the judge as a nameless face. It could possibly be one of the British judge, because the panel of judges are
or it could be somebody with no proper formal legal training, but a jurist, as they're known over there.
Well,
we don't know, but it could be.
We don't know.
But it could have been.
That's beside the way, because what happened last night was not a final determination. It was not a threat to our judicial sovereignty at all. What happens is that under the scheme, under the European Convention, if there is a possible real threat of a violation of someone's human rights, you're entitled, when you've exhausted proceedings here in this country, not before you've exhausted proceedings. So the European Court does not intervene until you've gone through every single court, right to the Supreme Court. And then there is a final supervisory jurisdiction to Europe. And the European Court makes a decision on whether there has been a violation or whether there will be a potential violation. Now, you talk...
Are we not a civilised modern country? Are we not a country, when it comes to the very concept of genuine refugees, we don't need lectures for anybody in Strasbourg on this. Surely we've led the way in Europe over centuries on it.
I think you're being very selective in your criticism. This is not a question of anybody lecturing us at all. Now, let's test it this way. You talk about the European Convention on Human Rights. There are a number of articles under the European Convention. Article 2, the right to life. Do you disagree with that? Of course you don't.
I'm sorry. I don't need to be given the right to life or the right to anything by a body in Strasbourg. I don't need that. I have that as a free-born person in this country. Well, I don't need it. It's not necessary. Well, I think we are not a third world country that needs to be monitored. That's my argument.
An interview is a two-way thing.
No, I get it. No, please.
So that's just one right.
You did ask me a question.
I did. I'll give you an example.
Yeah.
Article 6, the right to a fair trial. You're on holiday in somewhere, maybe... Spain, any of the 46 member states of the Council of Europe, you're arrested and you're kept in detention. What protects you? It's not English law. It is the European Convention on Human Rights, because you have a right, as an individual, to petition the European Court of Justice in respect of all your rights. The right to life, the right not to be tortured or treated inhumanely. Article 6, the right to a fair trial, the right to a lawyer. All those rights are enforceable not by the British courts, because you're outside of the jurisdiction of the British courts. You're abroad, and you're in a cell, and you need help. Who's going to give it to you? It can't be the British courts, it's the European Court of Human Rights.
And we wouldn't trust the Spanish courts or Greek courts to be fair and reasonable. Is that the reason?
If you look at the decisions, there are decisions against Spain, France, Italy for delay in trials. The United Kingdom, there have been gross violations of fair trial rights. We are not immune from criticism, and proper criticism. And this is not just against the United Kingdom.
We do at least have habeas corpus in this country, which other European countries don't have. But let me put this point...
Almost all countries have habeas corpus. That's a complete misstatement.
Let me put this... Well, I've seen many cases of people in Spain who have been waiting a year in detention before they go to trial, and that wouldn't happen here, is what I would argue. But Paul, let me put this fundamental point to you.
Of course.
You know, you believe in this system, and I can tell you've got great passion for it. But ultimately, there is a question here of who governs Britain. If we vote for a government, and the government is very clear with the British electorate what it intends to do and forms a majority, should it not be able to carry that out under our democratic system without interference from a foreign court?
Well, that's exactly what Russia said 2 months ago when they tried to withdraw from the European Convention. And in fact, they were expelled from the European Convention before they were entitled to withdraw. If we withdraw from the ECHR, we're going to be the pariah of Europe. We'll be no better than Russia.
Well, maybe we are already because of Brexit. Maybe that's how they view us already.
But you're confusing two things. Brexit has nothing to do with the European Convention of Human Rights.
So you think it would do our country reputational damage if we withdrew from ECHR?
Unquestionably.
Paul Garlick, thank you very much indeed for coming on and debating that with me. Now, I mentioned the fact there were members of Parliament that we sort of doorstepped effectively in Westminster earlier today, and none of them seemed to think leaving ECHR was a very good idea. Options on the table, and, you know, Tom Pursglove, we asked that question too, and yes, we may consider doing it at some point many, many months down the road. But my argument is, if this is months down the road, goodness knows how many more will be crossing the channel. Goodness knows how many more will be in the hands of these really horrible criminal trafficking gangs, because that's what they are. Well, one MP who I think does have quite a strong view on this is Peter Bone, the Conservative Member of Parliament for Wellingborough. And of course, in your time, human trafficking has been a subject you've been very heavily involved in.
Yeah, I chaired the all-party group against human trafficking. What we're seeing now isn't trafficking, it's smuggling, it's economic migrants, and they are abusing the system. And therefore, people who are being trafficked are losing out because of what's happening. And that's one of the reasons I'm going to introduce a bill on Monday, which is going to take us out of the European Court of Convention on Human Rights and have a British system, so British courts ultimately decide, won't be any foreign judge deciding.
Now, Dominic Raab, of course, is proposing his own legislation in, we're not sure, a few weeks' time. He wants to introduce a British Bill of Rights alongside our membership of the ECHR, and it seems to me that ultimately our Supreme Court can be overruled by that court in Strasbourg. What support do you think you're going to get in the House of Commons for your bill?
Well, I think I get a lot of support in the House of Commons, and I think I'll privately have a lot of support from ministers. Now, you heard the ex-minister, Tom Pursglove, he's absolutely determined to stop these crossings. He was being a little bit obtuse, wasn't he? Because he was saying, well, we might do it, we might not. I think what's happening, Number 10 Downing Street is thinking about this now. They realise the British people want this to happen, and I expect the government will announce their bill. But if they don't, well, they're going to have to vote on it on my bill.
OK, but if your bill doesn't get government support, it isn't going to go very far, is it?
Well, it's not likely to get support from the opposition because they'd let anyone in. I mean, that's the truth.
Do you believe we can solve this problem and remain members of the European Convention?
No, I don't. And it's not just the Rwanda situation. It's not just the small boats, which, of course, you were the first person to highlight coming across the channel. Don't forget, there's all these evil so-and-sos who've been rapists, murderers, who've come out of our prisons, who should be deported, and it's often that court that's stopping it happening.
Yeah, no, I mean, as you say, it isn't just people crossing the channel, it's people who, known torturers that we can't send back to countries, even people on potential terrorist charges. So now, I've seen this for years and years and years. I've been unhappy with it for years and years and years. Peter, you and I campaigned together in that Brexit referendum, up and down the length and breadth of this land. You know as well as I do that the reason we got a 73% turnout, not a 60% turnout, as all the experts thought, was this question of taking back control of our borders. If this government doesn't deliver that, they're going to lose the next election, aren't they?
Well, if we don't deliver it, we should be kicked out. By the way, the other person that campaigned with us was somebody called Tom Pursglove, who's now the minister.
I know.
So I think his heart's in the right place too.
Well, I think it is. And just a final thought, Peter Bone, you've been a very strong defender of Boris Johnson. Lord Geidt's resignation today, you know, the ethics advisor, the ethics czar, walks out on the Prime Minister, on the back of Partygate. It's not a good look, is it?
I don't even know who he is, to be honest. I've never met him. But my constituents, and I reckon the vast majority out there, have moved on for Partygate months ago.
41% of the parliamentary party, despite the fact that nearly 30% are on the payroll, voted no confidence in the Prime Minister.
And last time, it was a bigger figure when Boris first came. He only got 51%.
That was a different election.
No, it was more difficult.
That was a contested election.
Nigel, that was more difficult.
Do you know what? More people voted no confidence in Boris Johnson than even in Theresa May. He's in trouble. But if he delivers on this...
That's it.
If he delivers on this, everything will change.
He's got to deliver.
We're going to watch your bill on Monday with very great interest. In a moment, we'll talk about Rwanda. I'll be joined by an academic expert that knows that country well. Is it a suitable place to send people?
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV,
on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Defence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
we're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Defence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Coming up on The Mark Steyn Show. After a curveball was thrown into the government's plan to fly migrants to Rwanda, all eyes returned to Linton-on-Ouse after job adverts were issued for cleaners and security to start working at the proposed migrant camp immediately. Local MP Kevin Hollingwake will help unpick that one. The World Health Organization is giving monkeypox a new name because it's worried about stigma and racism, so Natalie Winters will be on hand to tell us all about that. Plus, amid skyrocketing petrol prices, our statman Jamie Jenkins suggests it's a plot by fossil fuel companies to make as much cash as possible before we're forced to go electric. All that and more on The Mark Steyn Show tonight from 8 o'clock.
Got to tell you, this ECHR debate is stirring some memories in me. It feels like the Brexit debate all over again, with great passions on both sides, including your views, which you've been sending in. One viewer says, definitely, of course we should leave the ECHR. Why would anyone allow us to tell us what we can do in our own country? Sim says, nope, of course not. Another says, short answer, yes. Long answer, domesticate some form of human rights legislation so that it can be amended by Parliament and put to a referendum. I think Brenda in Bristol would probably say, oh no, not another one. One viewer says, I don't understand why we can't use the ECHR to our advantage. France isn't a dangerous country. Why can't we take these people straight back there after they illegally land on our shores? And finally, Alan says, Patel claiming she'll carry on. We must leave the ECHR ASAP or we'll never control our borders. And Alan, I have to say, that is my feeling on this. I just don't think this is going to happen. All the while we have the Human Rights Act, which of course was the way in which we incorporated ECHR into UK domestic law. Now, that plane last night was supposed to go to Rwanda. Originally, there were going to be 130 people on it. In the end, there were 7 as I was on air live last night, and by the time we got to 10:05, nobody was going. But I think it's right and proper that we do talk about Rwanda because the government are determined to send planes. They may or may not go. But let's find out, what sort of country is Rwanda? Is it actually an appropriate place to send people? Well, Phil Clark is Professor of International Politics at the School of Oriental and African Studies. And Phil, you've been a big student of Rwanda and what has happened there. Just remind our viewers and listeners what actually happened there 30 years ago.
So Rwanda is a post-genocide society. In 1994, about 800,000, mostly Tutsi, were killed in the space of 100 days. But since the genocide, Rwanda has recovered really remarkably. It's a very peaceful, a very stable place. The economy is beginning to surge. So these asylum seekers who may be sent to Rwanda will face, I think, a very warm welcome. They'll find a very peaceful and stable environment. But my concern about this policy is not about Rwanda. It's the fact that the UK is reneging on its responsibilities to deal with asylum seekers here on UK territory. So my concern is the policy, not the fact that these individuals will be sent to Rwanda.
So Rwanda, you think, is a decent country. I mean, 1 or 2 British press who've been to Rwanda say that free speech is somewhat restricted there compared with this country. Is that a fair criticism?
It is a fair criticism. Rwanda is a very closed political environment. It's very difficult for the political opposition to function there. It's very difficult for critical journalists to have their voice heard. So there are certainly human rights concerns about the general environment in Rwanda. But maybe the thing that's most important for the asylum debate is that Rwanda has been hosting refugees and asylum seekers from the neighbouring countries for the last 20 years. In fact, there are 150,000 Congolese and Burundian refugees in Rwanda at the moment, living in very humane conditions. So again, my concern with the UK's policy is not Rwanda.
No, that's fine, but it's interesting to see what you say about Rwanda and the extraordinary way in which it's come on from that appalling genocide. When it comes to how we deal with refugees, we have to draw a distinction between who qualifies as a genuine refugee and who is coming here purely as an economic migrant. And here's my observation. I've been out into the English Channel. I've been watching this develop over the course of the last 3 years. The last time I was out with the GB News film crew, as the boat crossed the line into British waters, we filmed them throwing their iPhones into the sea. We actually filmed this and other documents that were being thrown away. If these were genuine refugees, why would they hide their identity?
I think these are genuine refugees in most cases. They are genuine asylum seekers in most cases. My concern about this
why would they hide their identity? If you're genuine in what you're doing, surely you'd want to show who you were and where you came from.
My guess is that that's only happening in a very small number of cases. The vast majority of asylum seekers who come to the UK, in fact, have their claims upheld. They are genuine asylum seekers. Now, I think part of the problem with this policy that's been implemented by the Tory government is that, in fact, it won't deter asylum seekers from coming to the UK. We can look at the Australian example. I'm an Australia. We've had offshore asylum detention for 20 years. In that period, the number of asylum seekers coming to Australia has in fact increased. These draconian policies don't deter individuals fleeing persecution in places like Syria and Afghanistan and Yemen. So if Priti Patel's argument is that this policy is necessary to deter asylum seekers, history suggests that this is completely the wrong way to go about it. In fact, it won't have that outcome.
A final thought. If these people are genuine refugees, fleeing terrible places and fleeing persecution, why are 3/4 of them very young men? And where are all the women and children? Why are they being left behind?
There are also large numbers of women and children in this contingent as well.
There aren't. It's 90% men.
They are, in some cases, the most likely to be persecuted and the most likely to be recruited into armed forces in places like Yemen and Afghanistan. So there's good reason for that. One thing that I would also say about the ECHR debate, and I think you've left this out of your discussion, Nigel, is that, of course, the first court ruling last night denying the deportation of one Iraqi individual was handed down by a British court. It wasn't the ECHR. The ECHR was the second court involved. The ECHR ruling also said something very important, which I don't think your program has talked about tonight, which is the ECHR said the reason that this individual should not be deported to Rwanda is that his case is still pending in the British courts. The British government is jumping the gun, moving ahead before the British courts have dealt with these cases.
I think the argument,
it's the ECHR that is trying to protect the British courts, saying that British institutions should be able to deal with this case.
But the sovereignty argument isn't whether ECHR makes good or bad judgments, it's that they're able to make judgments at all, which is why I said it's the Brexit debate all over again. Phil, thank you for joining us. Now, one of the things the government has talked about with huge passion is that we should all get electric cars. Yes, we are from 2030, we will not be selling any new petrol or diesel cars or vans. We're all going electric. And yet, at a time of rocketing fuel prices, and I mean rocketing fuel prices, the announcement this week that the £1,500 grant that was available to reduce the price of smaller electric cars has been removed by the government. And let me tell you, here in central London, if you've got an electric car and you want to go and charge it, well, the very, very best of luck to you. Their whole transport policy is in a complete and utter mess. And I'll predict that yet another U-turn that comes from this government is they will get rid of the edict that says no petrol diesel cars will be sold after 2030. In a moment, and of course, it's Royal Ascot this week and so much of our calendar through the year, whether it's Cheltenham, whether it's the Grand National, whether it's Derby Day, whether it's Ascot, the racing calendar is a big part of our national life. I'll be joined in a minute by a man who won the Grand National twice, Carl Llewellyn. I'll talk to him about racing. I'll also talk to him about horse welfare, which is becoming more and more of an issue within National Hunt. Back in a moment, we're Talking Pints.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV, on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Defence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Defence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Well, the passion of those debates we've just had remind me of 6 years ago and the Brexit referendum campaign. And it's 6 years ago to the day that I was on the river behind me, the Thames, being shouted at by Bob Geldof through a very loud microphone. It's all enough to make you think it really is that time of the day. And it's time for Talking Pints. And Carl Llewellyn, delighted that you're here to join me this evening.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Now, we've not met before.
No.
But I have seen you in action before. Because I was in the grandstand at Aintree in 1992, watching the Grand National, and I did have a bet on a horse, and you were riding that horse that day, weren't you?
Yeah, well, if it won.
Party Politics.
Yeah.
Well, I had to put money on a horse called Party Politics.
Yeah, a long time ago now, 30 years.
It's a long time ago, but you had 2 Grand National winners, Scottish Grand National, Welsh Grand National. What was it that made you good at steeplechase racing, dangerous steeplechase racing?
I think most jockeys would say that they were on the right horse on the right day, when conditions were right and the horse was in great form, and luckily enough didn't make a mess of it. So you know, you've got to get the right horse. The horse does most of the work, and without the horse having loads of ability, you've got no chance, no matter how good you are.
So you've got to have a good horse. Yeah. I mean, that makes sense. And we were talking the other week about Lester Piggott and how, you know, he'd go to Newmarket and spot the horse that he wanted to ride in the Derby on, and other jockeys would perhaps be a bit cheesed off that Leicester had sort of nicked the ride. But I was saying before you came in that actually the racing calendar is a big part of our year. The National Hunt Festivals, the flat season. This week it's Royal Ascot. It's the first proper Royal Ascot since the pandemic, since lockdown. Vast crowds of people flocking there. Do you think racing is as important in our lives as it was 30 years ago?
I think that other sports have developed, and so I think the world is getting a smaller place. So I think people can travel more and see other sports as well. So maybe it isn't quite as big as it was. It's still massive.
It's still big.
Yeah.
And it's big all over the world, isn't it, as well?
And crowds, you know, massive crowds all the time, especially at the big meetings. It's fantastic, like Cheltenham, Aintree and Ascot this week. You know, fantastic, sold out.
I was at Cheltenham this year. I went on the Friday. I went on Gold Cup Day. And, hey, there's a female jockey doing very well in jump racing. Rachel is doing incredibly well. I was there on the Friday at Cheltenham. It was magnificent. I mean, a full house, the organisation, everything about it was absolutely phenomenal. And you go to those big events and it feels like racing is healthy. The smaller events, perhaps it's much, much more difficult. But there was one thing at Cheltenham that really made me think. And I get it. I understand that these horses are bred to be jumping horses, that they wouldn't even exist if it wasn't for the racing or point-to-pointing or whatever it may be. And it kind of is point-to-pointing that is the kind of the nursery, isn't it, really?
Yeah, a little bit, yeah.
For National Hunt racing. So I get all of that, and I understand all of that. And I hadn't been to Cheltenham. I hadn't been to the festival for quite a number of years. I've been quite busy with other things. And it was interesting. As we arrived, there were a number, not huge, but a number of people there protesting, giving out leaflets. And, you know, you can say, well, it's the Animal Rights Brigade, it's the anti-hunt lot, it's the we want to ban fishing lot, it's the we want to ban everything lot. But they didn't quite strike me as being that. They didn't quite strike me as being. I mean, there is a very extreme element of the animal rights movement. These people didn't quite strike me as that. And I've talked about this with some younger people who, you know, youngsters who like riding horses. And what I saw on that day at Cheltenham, you know, the couple of horses had very bad falls. It happens. They get put down. Do you worry? I mean, let's face it, we're a country that has banned fox hunting. We're a country with a government that has brought in all sorts of animal welfare legislation. And one of Boris's big claims at the minute, he's going to ban trophies from Africa being imported back into the country. Do you think jump racing has got a real problem with this? And the fact that a certain number of horses every year get put down. Where do we go with this?
I don't think it's a real problem. As you say, there are thousands of horses bred for racing, and they're looked after so well. You know, it's in every owner and trainer's interest to have the horse in the best health and fitness and condition to race, so they get the best food. You know, the best hay and the best.
So they're well looked after.
Oh, fantastic!
And vets and all the rest of it. And they worked hard.
Yeah. So it's a high quality of life they get. They get, you know, they're looked after so well, and I'm afraid some of them do pay with their lives. But for the thousands and thousands that have a fantastic life and a fantastic retirement, there is a percentage that, you know, sadly lose their life. But you know, we think that's fair enough. I mean, it's sad, but compared to the thousands who have a fantastic life, which they wouldn't have any life without being bred for racing, it's probably, you know, it's just something that happens in the sport, and it you know, I don't think you can rule it out altogether without, you know, there's danger in everything, isn't there?
There is danger in everything. No, that is absolutely right.
How far do you go?
But it happens, you know, the big festivals, the National, Cheltenham. You know, we see several horses every year between both. Well, it depends on the going a little bit.
Yeah.
Several horses eat. But do you? I mean, I'm just saying to you, as somebody, you know, who spent his life in that industry, that I do sense there is a growing movement of people that would like to effectively ban jump racing, and it worries me.
Yeah, I think it's the world we're in now, isn't it? More and more people, you know, are concerned about things like that. You know, years ago, no one really they let everyone get on with their own bit, didn't they?
More and more people want to dictate. Carl,
yeah, and more
how
people.
You should live your life, or I should live my life. You know, whether it's the new legislation that you won't ever be able to buy a cigarette if you're born after a certain year, or I mean, you know, I sense from your answer that there's something in you that's a bit more libertarian. Yeah,
more and more people in every walk of life get offended by, you know, things that years ago no one would even cared about. They wouldn't even had a conversation about things, and now people are getting offended by it and think that it's wrong. So, you know, how far do we go? You know, loads of animals, you know, suffer. Dogs, where do you go? Do you not let them run around the park in case they hurt themselves? You know, it goes on, doesn't it? And it's just bit by bit, bowing to people. Where do we end up?
Yeah, and it's the same with what we can say to each other and how we can behave.
Very much so,
I mean, you know, are you easily offended?
No,
do you need your safe space?
No, not at all. I don't know. It doesn't matter. No, and people have their opinion. And you'd have to fall out because you disagree with someone, do you? But
I don't think you do.
No, but more and more people do think like that. That, you know, that if they don't like what someone said, they're offended and they fall out. I don't get it. Life's too short.
So, well, I agree with that, but an increasing number of people do take offence at virtually anything. So there you are. You know, it's the National. It's one of the big races, and you're there, and you're getting ready. What's the banter like between the jockeys? Because you're competing with each other for fame and fortune, aren't you?
Yeah, it's quite unique because you're in the changing rooms beforehand with all your opposition, but you actually get on, and the atmosphere and it's as if you're in a team, because you get on so well. You see each other every day, and you've got the same. You're like-minded. You like the adrenaline, and you know you obviously love horses. So it's like you're in a team, and then you go out and you're in direct competition, and you'll do as much as you can to beat the others. But you come in and you congratulate the winner, and you know the lads who've maybe had a fall and hurt themselves. Everyone will check, see if they're okay, and they'll help them if they need help and get them to hospital.
So there's a fair bit of teamwork, a fair bit of camaraderie there.
It's massive. It's very strange because, you know, it's as if you're in a really tight-knit team.
Yeah.
And then you go out and you're totally against each other, opposition, come back in and you're a team again. You know, we all look after each other and, you know, make sure they're okay, take them to hospital, wait there for hours for x-rays.
I mean, jump racing, I mean, crikey. You know, when I go and watch jump racing and I see a jockey come off and the horse is coming, I think, oh, I can barely watch it. I mean, it's got to be pretty scary when you hit the ground, isn't it?
No, you haven't got time to think about it, but it's what you're used to. You know, I mean, I wouldn't want to be jumping off a cliff and or you know, skydiving and things like that. It's what you're used to, isn't it? And
so what injuries did you sustain?
Oh God, I broke so much. So I obviously wasn't that good because I broke loads of legs and back and collarbones and arms and dislocated elbows and just loads of stuff. So I obviously wasn't that good because I fell off too much.
Well, you had some big wins.
Yeah, I got a few lucky ones along the way. Yeah.
But I mean, the sheer body damage that jockeys put themselves through.
Yeah, but you know, when you're young, you don't think of that, do you? I mean, now I realise I probably wish I hadn't fallen off so much, but at the time you're young and you just think, you know, it's a great adrenaline rush and it's a great buzz. And you know, you can't, when you retire, that's something that everyone misses. And loads of sportsmen, you know, when they miss the adrenaline, don't they, of sport and competition and winning.
Of course, and being in the limelight and the attention and all of it.
Yeah.
But you went on to be a trainer, but you're now helping and coaching young jockeys. And I'm just interested, you know, is the training different? Is the diet different? How are young jockeys today in racing compared to...
Massively more dedicated. You know, in all sports we've come on, the nutrition side is, you know, we just used to eat badly, you know, and starve yourself. If you need to lose weight, you'd starve yourself and this sort of thing. So you'd ride dehydrated a lot of the time and this sort of thing. A lot of I wasn't too bad with weight, but a lot of lads who are bigger than me, you know, they'd be very dehydrated riding, which in turn isn't good for taking falls when you're dehydrated. It's been proven you do more damage.
So what would be a good weight for a jump jockey?
9'7", 9'9", that's a great weight. You know, you could eat sensibly then. But nutrition's improved. Recovery from injuries, I mean, they've got some free centres around the country now where specialists, where you've got a team of people who can look after you, and physios and rehabilitation, and some fantastic things that the Injured Jockeys Fund, which is a fantastic organisation, have built and set up, and they're running now. You know, it's a very expensive thing, but the treatment jockeys get now is so much better than it was.
The medical treatment they get.
Yeah, we're to look after ourselves basically, and again, coaching. You know, there was no coaches in our days. You just got well done if you did well, and something else if you didn't. Whereas now there's, you know, you can analyse it more, and obviously television helps, and you got easy access to replays and things like that.
And psychology, does that come into it as well?
Yeah, it does. Yeah, there's sports psychologists you can see as well, and it's all just a phone call away. So all that's improved so much. You know, it needed to, but you know, we're catching up on other sports, so it's great.
When you look at the flat, you know, obviously Ascot this week and the Derby a couple of weeks ago. Do you follow the flat and go to flat meetings as well, or are you just a jump jockey?
No, I follow the flat a little bit, yeah, just a bit. I normally go to Ascot. I'm not going this week, but yeah, I love Ascot. I mean, the atmosphere is just fantastic, and that's what everyone loves. Just the just being there amongst, you know, all them people, and it's fantastic.
But completely dominated by Arab money, isn't it?
A lot of it is, yeah. A lot of it is, but yeah, that's where it is, yeah.
Where's the British money for racing? I mean, the flat wouldn't have survived without Arab money, would it?
It probably would survive, but in a different form. You know, a lot of people might say they'd be better without it. I wouldn't say that, but you know, there'd be a lot more people would be interested, maybe. But jumping-wise, it's you know, not much of that sort of money in it.
No. And a final thought, here we are, inflation is back at, you know, heading for double digits, the government's in trouble. It all feels a bit like the 1970s in some ways with all the things that are going on. How do you feel at the sort of state of the country is, and where are we going as a nation?
It's worrying, isn't it? Yeah, well, I think we're probably going the wrong way, I'd say.
Well, I think that's probably right.
I think we should change direction, but...
Yeah, well, I think on that note, we'll get back to our beer. Carl, thank you very much indeed for joining me on Talking Pint.
Cheers.
I might bring you back in.
Okay.
Okay, that is it. We've got time for Barrage the Farage. I, of course, never see these questions until they're presented to me on this card. And I'm going to bring Carl back into this. One viewer asks, with horse racing becoming a contentious subject regarding animal welfare, the point that I raised earlier, how can we make it safer for both horse and jockey? And just before you answer that, you know, for example, Beecher's Brook, that famous fence at Aintree, they have changed it a bit to make it a bit safer, haven't they?
Massively. It's a completely different fence.
Yeah.
It used to be stakes, wooden stakes that were solid, which is quite high, and they were upright. And now it's a plastic little brush fence with a lovely slope on it and some spruce on top. It's a completely different fence. I mean, you look at the pictures from years ago to what it is now, it's a completely different fence.
Were you scared jumping beaches?
No, because your adrenaline's up and you love that you're on good horses that are mainly very good jumpers, and so they're bred to do that.
So is making it easier and safer, is that the right thing to have done? Or was it more of a challenge before?
It was much more of a challenge and much more of a test for horsemanship. So you had a better feeling of when you completed it setting out to get round was a great achievement before.
Yeah. Well, I suspect we'll go more and more in this direction. Camilla asks me, America joined in World War II only after their own security was threatened. Will they do the same over Ukraine? Well, America joined World War II, but it was helping, of course, the British with Lend-Lease. Interestingly, the 102-year-old we had here yesterday, Steve Melnikoff, his family came from Ukraine. Nearly his entire family perished in World War II. Look, as far as Ukraine's concerned, you can agree or disagree, but it's Boris Johnson that's taken the international lead in terms of supplying training, weapons and equipment to Ukraine. And frankly, America has come in behind what Johnson has done. The one thing America is keen to do, and NATO are keen to do, is not to get directly involved. Laura asks, do you think there'll be a second referendum on Scottish independence? Oh, they never stop, do they? I mean, Nicola Sturgeon, she's against the Scottish referendum result. She's against the Brexit referendum result. I mean, there is no democratic choice taken by the people in this country that Nicola Sturgeon doesn't want to undo. If they do have a second referendum, I tell you what, they will lose. Another asks, final question, have you tried vaping? I know all of you want me to give up smoking. I have tried vaping. I think it was absolutely vile and it made me cough horribly. But there we are. Enough of me. It's been quite a contentious evening. ECHR is a very, very powerful subject. I promise you this, folks, those planes will not go to Rwanda. All the while we're tied to ECHR and have the Human Rights Act enshrined in British law. I believe I'm right on this one. I'm done for this evening. Back with you tomorrow at 7, but I'm going to hand you over to Mark Stein.
You are so right on that ECHR business, Nigel. You're absolutely right. We're going to have more on that on tonight's Mark Stein Show. More on the symbolic national humiliation of that non-flight to Rwanda. We've got Neil Oliver here, and we'll have more on Linton-on-Ouse, the village in North Yorkshire, which none of those Euro judges seem in the least bit interested in, and where a lot of those Rwandan guys are going to wind up instead. Plus the monkeypox and petrol prices. They're not necessarily connected, but you never know these days. Stick around. It's all coming up after the weather.
Hello again, I'm Aidan McGibbon from the Met Office. A warm night for many of us, and then sunny and hot in places during Thursday. Temperatures are rising over the next few days, but not for everyone. There are some weather fronts in the northwest which will continue to affect parts of Scotland and Northern Ireland, particularly towards the northwest. Cloud and a few outbreaks of rain here. Elsewhere, a lot of high pressure and clear spells overnight, widely across England and Wales, but some clear spells also affecting eastern parts of Northern Ireland, southern and eastern Scotland. It's really towards the far northwest of Scotland, the Northwest Highlands, the Western Isles and perhaps Shetland, where we'll see some outbreaks of rain overnight. But otherwise, a dry night for many and a warm night. Temperatures in the double figures across the UK. A bright start then for eastern Scotland, southern Scotland, much of England and Wales Thursday morning. And with the strong sunshine from the word go, temperatures will shoot up. But for parts of central and western Scotland, Northern Ireland and then elsewhere across Scotland,